You watch others effortlessly charm their way through conversations, while you struggle to make meaningful connections at work. Every networking event feels like a battlefield where you're armed with good intentions, but lack the weapons to truly influence and inspire others around you. I am Dale Carnegie, and I spent my life discovering why some people naturally draw others to them, while equally talented individuals remain invisible in every room they enter. Through my research and personal experience helping millions of people transform their relationships, I uncovered the 9 fundamental social skills that separate those who lead from those who follow. What I'm about to share with you will revolutionize how you connect with people, whether you're dealing with colleagues, clients, or anyone whose respect and cooperation you need. The same principles that transformed shy, awkward individuals into confident leaders can work for you, regardless of your starting point. But first, like this video, subscribe for more life-changing wisdom, and comment below where you're watching from. I want to see our global community of connection builders grow. I want you to know that I wasn't born with any special gift for connecting with people. In fact, quite the opposite was true. Growing up on a farm in northwestern Missouri, I was painfully shy, awkward, and completely inept at human relations. My childhood diary, which I still keep, reminds me daily of just how far I've traveled on this journey. The entries from my youth are filled with painful accounts of social failures. I remember writing about the time I tried to ask a girl to the school dance and became so tongue-tied that I literally ran away mid-sentence. Or the church social where I stood in the corner for 3 hours, unable to join a single conversation, watching other young people laugh and connect with an ease that seemed impossible to me. My father was a hard-working man who understood corn and cattle but had little patience for what he called fancy talk. My mother, bless her soul, tried to encourage me, but she was equally mystified by my struggles. In our small farming community, social interaction was supposed to be naturally. Worked together, went to church together, helped your neighbors. Yet I felt like I was speaking a foreign language that everyone else understood perfectly. The turning point came during my senior year of high school. I had been selected to give a speech at our graduation ceremony, not because I was good at speaking, but because I had the best grades. The night before graduation, I practiced my speech in the barn, with only the cows as my audience. Even they seemed unimpressed. When the moment came to speak, I walked to the podium with my knees shaking and my voice barely above a whisper. Halfway through my prepared remarks, I looked out at the sea of faces, my classmates, their families, my own parents, and I saw something that changed my life forever. They weren't judging me. They were actually leaning forward, trying to hear what I had to say. They wanted me to succeed. That night, I made a decision that would shape the rest of my life. I wrote in my diary, I may not be the smartest person in this room, but I'm going to learn how to connect with people if it kills me. There has to be a way to understand what makes people tick, what makes them feel comfortable, what makes them want to listen and respond. I started studying people, the way other young men studied farming techniques or business practices. I watched successful speakers. I observed how popular people interacted. I began experimenting with different approaches to conversation. Every failure became a lesson, every small success a building block toward understanding. When I moved to New York to pursue my dreams, I was still that shy farm boy inside, but I was now a farm boy with a mission. I was determined to crack the code of human relations, not just for myself, but for all the other people who felt as lost and disconnected as I had felt for so many years. Those early years in the city were brutal. I tried selling correspondence, courses. I attempted to break into acting. I even tried my hand at sales, and I failed at all of them because I still hadn't mastered the art of connecting with people. But each failure taught me something valuable about human nature, about what people really wanted and needed from their interactions with others. The breakthrough finally came. When I began teaching public speaking at the YMCA, working with ordinary people who shared my own struggles with confidence and connection, I started to see patterns. I discovered that everyone, regardless of their background or education, had the same fundamental desires: to feel important, to be understood, to be appreciated, and to connect meaningfully with others. This realization transformed not just my teaching, but my entire approach to human relations. I began developing the principles that would eventually become the foundation of everything I would teach for the rest of my life. When I first began teaching at the YMCA, I thought social success was about having the right words, the perfect techniques, or the most polished presentation. I was completely wrong. The real foundation of all social success lies in understanding one fundamental truth about human nature. Truth so simple that most people overlook it entirely. I discovered this truth quite by accident during one of my early classes. I had a student named Robert, a brilliant engineer who could design complex machinery but couldn't hold a conversation with his own colleagues. Week after week, I tried teaching him speaking techniques, conversation starters, and presentation skills. Nothing worked. He remained as socially awkward as ever. Then one evening, Robert came to class, devastated. His young son had been diagnosed with a serious illness, and he needed to take time off work to care for him. As he shared his story, something magical happened. For the first time since I'd known him, Robert was completely natural, compelling, and authentic. The entire class was drawn to him, hanging on every word. That's when I realized what I'd been missing. Robert wasn't successful that night because he used better techniques. He was successful because he had forgotten about himself entirely. His focus was completely on something that mattered deeply to him, and that authentic passion made him magnetic. This revelation led me to understand the fundamental principle that underlies all social skill. People are primarily interested in themselves, their own problems, their own desires, and their own experiences. But here's the crucial insight: when you become genuinely interested in others and their concerns, you tap into the most powerful force in human relations. I began studying this principle obsessively. I watched successful people in every field: business, leaders, politicians, entertainers, even the most popular people in my own neighborhood. Without exception, those who excelled in human relations had mastered the art of making others feel important and understood. But I also discovered something equally important. This interest must be genuine. People have an almost supernatural ability to detect insincerity. The moment you try to fake interest in someone, they sense it, and your relationship becomes hollow and manipulative. Through years of observation and experimentation, I learned that the foundation of all social success rests on this single principle: become genuinely interested in other people, not as a technique or strategy, but as a fundamental shift in how you view the world around you. This principle revolutionized my own relationships. Instead of walking into a room thinking, "I hope these people like me," I began thinking, "I wonder what fascinating things I can learn about these people." Instead of worrying about what impression I was making, I focused entirely on understanding the people I was with. The transformation was immediate and dramatic. People began seeking me out for conversation. They remembered our interactions fondly. They invited me to social events and introduced me to their friends. But most importantly, I was no longer that lonely, awkward farm boy. I had become someone who genuinely cared about the people around me. This principle became the foundation for everything else I would teach. Every social skill, every technique for building relationships, every method for influencing people positively, they all spring from this single source: authentic, genuine interest in others. Without this foundation, all other social skills become mere manipulation. With it, they become tools for creating meaningful connections that enrich both your life and the lives of everyone you meet. When you truly understand and embrace this principle, you discover that social success isn't about being interesting, it's about being interested. The first social skill that will transform your life is mastering the art of genuine interest in others. I learned this lesson through one of the most heartbreaking letters I ever received, a letter that taught me more about human nature than all my years of study combined. The letter came from a wealthy businessman, a man who had achieved everything our society considers successful. He owned a thriving company, lived in a mansion, drove expensive cars, and had more money than he could spend in several lifetimes. Yet his letter was filled with profound loneliness and desperation. "Mr. Carnegie," he wrote, "I have everything a man could want, but I feel completely invisible. I attend social gatherings where people know my name and my net worth, but no one really knows me. I sit in meetings where people hang on my every word because of my position, but I can tell they're not truly interested in what I have to say as a person. I would give half my fortune to have just one genuine friendship." This letter shook me to my core because it revealed a universal truth. Even the most successful people among us are starving for genuine human connection. We all crave the feeling that someone truly cares about us as individuals, not for what we can do for them or what we represent. I began conducting an experiment with my students. I asked them to spend 1 week practicing what I called authentic curiosity. Instead of trying to impress people with their own knowledge or experiences, they were to focus entirely on learning about others. The results were astounding. One student, a shy accountant named Margaret, reported that she had the most meaningful conversation of her life with a grocery store clerk. By asking genuine questions about the clerk's interests and really listening to the answers, she discovered that this ordinary person was actually a talented artist who painted beautiful landscapes in her spare time. Margaret left that grocery store with a new friend and a completely different perspective on the people around her. The key to developing genuine interest is understanding that every person you meet has a fascinating story, unique experiences, and valuable insights. The challenge is learning to see past the surface, past job titles, social status, or first impressions to discover the real human being underneath. I developed a personal practice that transformed my ability to connect with people. Before every social interaction, I would ask myself 3 questions. What can I learn from this person? What experiences have shaped them? What are they passionate about? This mental preparation shifted my entire focus from trying to be impressive to being impressed by others. But genuine interest goes beyond just asking questions. It requires what I call heart listening, listening not just to the words people say, but to the emotions behind those words, the dreams they're pursuing, and the challenges they're facing. When you listen with your heart, people sense that you truly care, and they open up in ways that surprise both of you. I remember meeting a janitor at one of the buildings where I taught. Most people walked past him without acknowledgement, but I made it a point to learn his name and ask about his work. I discovered that James had immigrated from Ireland 20 years earlier, had put 3 children through college with his janitor's salary, and was prouder of their achievements than any CEO was of their corporate success. That conversation taught me that genuine interest isn't about finding people who are already obviously interesting. It's about being the kind of person who can find the interesting aspects of everyone you meet. When you develop this skill, you discover that the world is full of fascinating people who are just waiting for someone to care enough to really get to know them. The transformation this creates in your own life is remarkable. When people feel genuinely seen and appreciated by you, they naturally want to spend time with you. They seek out your company. They remember your conversations fondly, and they become genuinely interested in you in return. I learned the true power of remembering names through one of the most embarrassing moments of my career, a moment that taught me why a person's name is to them the sweetest sound in any language. I was speaking at a corporate event in Chicago, feeling quite confident about my growing reputation as a teacher of human relations. After my presentation, a distinguished gentleman approached me with genuine enthusiasm, shaking my hand warmly and telling me how much my speech had meant to him. We talked for several minutes about his business challenges and how he planned to apply what he'd learned. 3 hours later, at the evening reception, this same man approached me again, this time with his wife. I could see the anticipation in his eyes as he prepared to introduce me to her. But when he said, "I'd like you to meet my wife," I drew a complete blank. I couldn't remember his name to save my life. The disappointment in his eyes was unmistakable. Here was a man who had hung on every word of my presentation about the importance of making people feel valued, and I had just demonstrated that he wasn't important enough for me to remember his name. In that moment, I understood viscerally why Napoleon said that a man's name is to him the most important sound in any language. That embarrassing failure launched me into an intensive study of memory techniques, but more importantly, it taught me that remembering names isn't really about memory, it's about caring. When you truly value someone, you make the effort to remember what matters most to them. Starting with their name, I began developing what I call my name preservation system. First, I made a commitment that from that day forward, I would never again meet someone without making their name permanently part of my memory. This meant paying complete attention when introductions were made, asking for clarification if I didn't hear clearly, and immediately using the person's name in conversation. But I went further than most people do. I began keeping what I called my relationship journal, a small notebook where I recorded not just names, but important details about every person I met. When John mentioned his daughter's upcoming graduation, I wrote it down. When Mary told me about her passion for gardening, I made a note. When Robert shared his concerns about his aging father, I recorded it. The transformation in my relationships was immediate and profound. When I saw John 3 months later and asked about his daughter's graduation, the look of surprise and pleasure on his face was worth all the effort I'd put into my system. When I asked Mary about her garden the following spring, she lit up with joy and talked enthusiastically for 10 minutes about her flowers. People began seeking me out at events. They remembered our previous conversations and looked forward to continuing them. More importantly, they felt valued and appreciated in a way that most people rarely experience in their social interactions. I discovered that remembering names and personal details does something magical for relationships. It communicates that the person matters enough to you that you've made space in your mind and life for them. In a world where most people are so focused on themselves that they forget others immediately after meeting them, remembering names makes you extraordinarily rare and valuable. The technique itself is simple but requires sincere effort. When someone tells you their name, repeat it immediately. "Nice to meet you, Sarah." Use it naturally during your conversation. "Sarah, that's fascinating." And before you part company, use it again. "Sarah, it's been wonderful talking with you." If the name is unusual or complex, don't be embarrassed to ask for the correct pronunciation or spelling. People appreciate your effort to get it right, and they're usually happy to help you learn something that's important to them. But remember, this skill only works when it comes from genuine care for others. If you're remembering names as a manipulation technique, people will sense your insincerity. When you remember names because you truly value the people you meet, it becomes one of the most powerful tools for building lasting relationships. The most important conversation of my life taught me that I had been doing listening completely wrong for years. It happened during a dinner party at the home of a prominent New York businessman, and it forever changed how I understood the art of human connection. I found myself seated next to a woman who had recently returned from 6 months in Europe. Eager to impress her with my own travel experiences, I launched into stories about my own journeys, the places I'd been, and the insights I'd gained. I thought I was being fascinating and worldly, but as I talked, I noticed something troubling. Her eyes began to glaze over. She started looking around the room. She was politely nodding, but I could see that she was completely disconnected from our conversation. I was losing her, and I couldn't understand why. Then something occurred to me that stopped me mid-sentence. I realized I had been talking for 15 minutes straight without asking her a single question about her own travels. Here was a woman who had just spent half a year exploring Europe, undoubtedly with amazing stories and insights of her own, and I had been treating her like an audience for my own experiences. I stopped talking and asked, "I've been doing all the talking. Tell me about your favorite place in Europe." The transformation was immediate and dramatic. Her eyes lit up, she leaned forward, and for the next hour, she shared the most fascinating stories about her adventures. She described hidden cafes in Paris, sunrise views from Swiss mountaintops, and conversations with locals that had changed her perspective on life. But here's what astonished me. At the end of the evening, she told several people that I was the most interesting conversationalist she'd met in years. I had barely said a word for the last hour, yet she considered our conversation the highlight of her evening. That night I discovered that being truly interested is far more powerful than being interesting. This revelation led me to study the art of listening with the same intensity I had once devoted to speaking. I discovered that most people are terrible listeners, not because they can't hear, but because they're so focused on what they want to say next that they miss what's actually being communicated to them. I identified 3 levels of listening that completely transform relationships. The first level is waiting to talk. This is what most people call listening, but it's really just pausing between speaking opportunities. The second level is listening for information, paying attention to facts and details, but missing the emotional content. The third level, and the most powerful, is listening for understanding, hearing not just what people say, but what they mean, what they feel, and what they need. True listening requires that you temporarily forget about yourself and your own agenda. It means giving someone the gift of your complete attention, which has become incredibly rare in our distracted world. When you listen with genuine attention, people feel heard in a way they rarely experience elsewhere. I developed several practices that transformed my listening ability. First, I learned to listen with my eyes as well as my ears, watching for facial expressions, body language, and emotional cues that revealed what people were really communicating. Second, I began asking what I call deepening questions, questions that encouraged people to share more about their experiences, feelings, and perspectives. Most importantly, I learned to resist the urge to immediately relate everything back to my own experiences. When someone shares a story about their vacation, the natural tendency is to respond with your own vacation story. But I discovered that this actually kills connection rather than building it. Instead, I learned to ask questions that kept the focus on their experience. What was the most surprising thing about that trip? Or how did that experience change your perspective? The impact of becoming a masterful listener extends far beyond social situations. In business, I found that the people who listened well were the ones who truly understood their customers, their employees, and their markets. In families, the best parents were those who listened to their children with genuine interest rather than just waiting for their turn to give advice. People began seeking me out specifically because they knew I would truly listen to them. They would say things like, "I need to talk to someone who will really hear what I'm saying." And they would come to me because they had learned that I valued their thoughts and feelings enough to give them my complete attention. I discovered the transformative power of speaking others' language through a student who changed my entire understanding of communication. His name was Giuseppe, a brilliant Italian engineer who had immigrated to America with dreams of building bridges, but found himself unable to connect with his colleagues or advance in his career. Giuseppe came to my class in desperation. Despite his exceptional technical skills and innovative ideas, he was being overlooked for promotions and excluded from important projects. His English was grammatically correct, but when he spoke, his American colleagues would nod politely and then ignore his suggestions. He was on the verge of giving up and returning to Italy. During our first session, I listened to Giuseppe explain a complex engineering concept. His explanation was technically perfect, filled with precise terminology and detailed specifications. But as I watched the other students' faces, I saw the same polite confusion that Giuseppe encountered at work. They couldn't follow him, not because his English was poor, but because he was speaking in a language they didn't understand, the language of pure technical expertise. I realized that Giuseppe's problem wasn't linguistic, it was cultural and contextual. He was speaking the language of Italian engineering culture, where precision and technical depth were valued above all else. But his American colleagues spoke the language of practical application and immediate benefits. They needed to understand not just how something worked, but why it mattered to them. I worked with Giuseppe to translate his ideas into his colleagues' language. Instead of beginning with technical specifications, we practiced starting with the problems his solutions would solve. Instead of using complex engineering terms, we found everyday analogies that made his innovations accessible to non-engineers. Most importantly, we learned to frame his ideas in terms of the values and priorities that mattered to his specific audience. The transformation was remarkable. Within 2 months, Giuseppe was not only being heard in meetings, but his colleagues were actively seeking his input on projects. He received the promotion he'd been hoping for and eventually became one of the most respected voices in his department. This experience taught me that speaking others' language isn't just about using the right words, it's about understanding and adapting to the way different people think, process information, and make decisions. Every person has their own internal language shaped by their background, experiences, values, and current concerns. I began studying the different languages people speak beyond their native tongues. There's the language of emotions, where feelings and relationships take precedence over facts and logic. There's the language of practicality, where immediate applications and concrete benefits matter most. There's the language of vision, where big picture possibilities and future potential capture attention. And there's the language of security, where risk management and proven track records are paramount. The most successful communicators I observed were those who could quickly identify which language their audience spoke and adapt their message accordingly. When talking to someone who spoke the language of emotions, they would emphasize how their ideas would make people feel. When addressing someone who spoke the language of practicality, they would focus on immediate, tangible benefits. I learned to listen for clues about people's preferred language. Do they ask, "How will this make me feel?" Or "How will this help me achieve my goals?" Do they want detailed analysis or quick summaries? Do they respond better to stories and examples or to data and statistics? This skill proved invaluable in every area of my life. When speaking to business executives, I learned to frame my ideas in terms of efficiency, profits, and competitive advantage. When talking to teachers, I emphasized student outcomes and educational impact. When addressing parents, I focused on how these principles would help them raise confident, successful children. The key is remembering that effective communication isn't about expressing yourself clearly, it's about being understood clearly. This requires the humility to set aside your own preferred communication style and the skill to adapt to what works best for the person you're trying to reach. When you master the art of speaking others' language, you discover that the same idea can be presented in dozens of different ways, each one perfectly crafted for a specific audience. Your message doesn't change, but your delivery transforms to meet people where they are, rather than expecting them to come to where you are. The The most powerful lesson I ever learned about appreciation came from a crumpled letter I found in my coat pocket, a letter that taught me the difference between flattery and genuine appreciation, and why that difference can transform lives. The letter was from Thomas, a factory worker who had attended one of my courses 6 months earlier. His handwriting was rough, his grammar imperfect, but his message was profound. He wrote, "Mr. Carnegie, you probably don't remember me, but in your class, you said something that changed my life. You told us that everyone has something valuable to contribute, even if it's not obvious at first glance. Last week, I suggested a small change to our production line that saved the company thousands of dollars. My supervisor said it was brilliant. For the first time in 20 years, I felt like my mind mattered, not just my muscles. What struck me wasn't just Thomas's success, but what had triggered it. I had given him something that he had been starving for his entire working life, genuine recognition that he had value beyond his physical labor. That simple acknowledgement had unlocked potential that had been dormant for decades. This experience led me to understand one of the most fundamental truths about human nature. People are desperately hungry for sincere appreciation, yet most of us are living on a starvation diet of recognition. We give our children criticism more often than praise. We tell our employees what they're doing wrong far more frequently than we acknowledge what they're doing right. We notice our spouse's mistakes, but take their daily contributions for granted. But I also learned that there's a crucial difference between appreciation and flattery, and understanding this difference is essential for building genuine relationships. Flattery is saying something nice to get something in return. Appreciation is recognizing genuine value in someone without expecting anything back. I began conducting experiments with sincere appreciation in my own life. I started looking for specific things to appreciate in every person I encountered, not generic compliments, but genuine recognition of their unique contributions, efforts, or qualities. When I thanked my secretary, instead of saying "good job," I said, "The way you organized my schedule today allowed me to spend quality time with each client instead of feeling rushed. Your attention to detail makes my work so much more effective." When I spoke to a waiter, instead of a simple thank you, I might say, "Your recommendations were perfect, and you made our celebration feel special. You clearly care about your customers having a wonderful experience." The responses were immediate and profound. People would light up, stand taller, and often share that no one had ever acknowledged that particular contribution before. But more importantly, they would carry that recognition forward, often performing even better because someone had noticed and valued their efforts. I discovered that effective appreciation has 3 essential elements. First, it must be specific, focusing on particular actions, qualities, or contributions rather than general praise. Second, it must be sincere, based on genuine observation and honest feelings rather than manipulation. Third, it must be about them, focused on their value and contributions rather than how their actions benefited you. Through years of practice, I learned that appreciation is not just about making people feel good in the moment, though it certainly does that. It's about helping people see their own value and potential. When you sincerely appreciate someone's efforts, you're not just acknowledging what they've done, you're encouraging them to continue growing and contributing in that area. I began keeping what I called an appreciation journal, where I recorded daily observations about the contributions of people around me. This practice trained my mind to notice positive things that I might otherwise overlook, instead of focusing primarily on what needed to be fixed or improved. I developed the habit of actively looking for what was working well and acknowledging it. The impact on my relationships was extraordinary. People began seeking opportunities to do things that I might appreciate. They took more care with their work, knowing that their efforts would be noticed and valued. Most importantly, they felt genuinely cared for and respected. which created a foundation for deeper, more meaningful connections. This principle transformed not just my personal relationships, but my understanding of leadership and influence. I realized that people don't just want to be managed or directed. They want to be seen, valued, and appreciated for who they are and what they contribute to the world around them. I learned the extraordinary power of finding common ground during what should have been the most hostile business meeting of my career. The situation seemed impossible, two companies locked in a bitter dispute that had escalated to threats of litigation. Yet by the end of that meeting, former enemies had become collaborators, all because of a single shared memory that changed everything. The meeting was between the leadership of a manufacturing company and their former supplier, who they claimed had delivered defective materials that cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars. The supplier insisted the materials met specifications and blamed the manufacturer's processes. Both sides had brought lawyers. The atmosphere was poisonous with accusations and counterclaims. As a consultant brought in to mediate, I watched these business leaders tear each other apart with technical arguments and legal threats. Each side was so focused on proving the other wrong that they had lost sight of any possibility for resolution. The meeting was heading toward an expensive court battle that would benefit no one except the attorneys. Then something unexpected happened. During a break, I overheard the manufacturing company's CEO mention that he had started his career 30 years earlier as a machinist in Detroit. The supplier's president, overhearing this, looked up with surprise and said, "Detroit? I worked at Ford's River Rouge plant in the 70s. What shop were you in?" For the next 10 minutes, these two men who had been ready to destroy each other in court discovered they had worked in the same industrial complex, knew many of the same people, and had shared similar struggles as young men trying to build careers in manufacturing. They talked about the old supervisors, the challenges of those early days, and their respect for the skilled craftsmen who had taught them the business. When we reconvened the meeting, the entire dynamic had shifted. These weren't just adversaries. In a business dispute, they were two men who understood each other's background and shared common values about quality, hard work, and integrity. Instead of focusing on blame, they began working together to understand what had gone wrong and how to prevent similar problems in the future. The dispute was resolved that afternoon with a handshake agreement that strengthened rather than severed their business relationship, all because we had discovered the human connection that lay beneath the business conflict. This experience taught me that beneath every disagreement, conflict, or social barrier, there are almost always shared experiences, common values, or mutual interests waiting to be discovered. The challenge is learning to look for them, especially when emotions are running high or differences seem insurmountable. I began studying successful diplomats, negotiators, and peacemakers to understand how they bridge divides between people who seem to have nothing in common. I discovered that they all shared one crucial skill. They could find the human elements that connected apparently opposed parties. Sometimes the common ground is obvious shared professions, similar backgrounds, or mutual acquaintances, but often it's subtler. Both parties care deeply about their families. Both value fairness and integrity. Both want to be respected for their expertise, or both are facing similar business challenges. I developed what I call the bridge building conversation, a systematic approach to discovering connections with anyone. Regardless of how different we might initially appear, I would ask about their background, their interests, their challenges, and their values, always listening for points of intersection with my own experience or that of others I knew. The magic happens when people realize that, despite their differences, they share something meaningful. A Republican and Democrat might discover they both grew up in small farming communities. A young entrepreneur and an experienced executive might find they both struggled with the same self-doubt when starting their careers. A customer and service representative might realize they're both parents dealing with similar challenges, raising teenagers, These discoveries don't eliminate real differences or solve all problems, but they create a foundation of human understanding that makes resolution possible. When people see each other as individuals with shared experiences rather than as representatives of opposing positions, they become more willing to listen, more open to compromise, and more creative in finding solutions that work for everyone. I learned that finding common ground isn't about avoiding or minimizing differences. It's about discovering the human connections that make those differences manageable and sometimes even valuable. The transformation I witnessed in Sarah still amazes me to this day. She was the quietest student in my public speaking class, so shy that she would turn red and stammer when called upon to speak. Yet within 3 months, she had become the most sought-after person in her office, with colleagues regularly seeking her advice and friendship. The secret wasn't that she learned to talk more. It was that she learned to ask the right questions. Sarah's breakthrough came during a practice session where I challenged my students to have meaningful conversations without talking about themselves at all. Most students found this exercise incredibly difficult, but Sarah discovered it was liberating. For the first time in her life, she wasn't worried about what to say next, because her focus was entirely on learning about the other person. She began with simple questions. How did you get interested in your line of work? And what's been the most rewarding part of your career? But as she became more comfortable, her questions became more thoughtful and engaging. What's something about your job that most people wouldn't expect? And if you could change one thing about your industry, what would it be? The results were remarkable. People began lighting up when they talked with Sarah. They would seek her out at social events and tell others about the fascinating conversations they'd had with her. Sarah had discovered one of the most powerful secrets of human connection. People love to talk about themselves, their experiences, and their opinions, but only when someone is genuinely interested in hearing what they have to say. This experience with Sarah led me to study the art of questioning more deeply. I realized that most people ask questions for the wrong reasons: to gather information they need, to prove their own knowledge, or to move conversations in directions that benefit them. But the most powerful questions are those asked from pure curiosity and genuine interest in understanding another person's perspective. I began developing what I call my conversation toolkit, a collection of questions that consistently opened doors to meaningful dialogue. Some were broad and exploratory. What's the most interesting project you're working on right now? Others were more specific and personal. What's something you've learned recently that surprised you? Still others were reflective, looking back. What decision are you most proud of making? But I discovered that the specific questions mattered less than the spirit behind them. When people sense that you're asking questions because you genuinely care about their answers, they respond with openness and enthusiasm. When they feel you're just making conversation or gathering information for your own purposes, they give polite but superficial responses. The most powerful questions I learned to ask were what I call feeling questions, questions that invited people to share not just facts, but emotions and perspectives. Instead of asking, "What do you do for work?" I might ask, "What do you love most about your work?" Instead of "Where are you from?" I might ask, "What do you miss most about your hometown?" These questions consistently led to deeper, more meaningful conversations because they acknowledge that people are more than just their circumstances. They have feelings, dreams, challenges, and insights that make them uniquely interesting. I also learned the importance of follow-up questions. When someone shared something meaningful, I would ask questions that showed I was truly listening. How did that experience change your perspective? Or what did you learn about yourself through that challenge? These follow-up questions demonstrated that I valued what they had shared and wanted to understand it more deeply. Perhaps most importantly, I discovered that asking good questions is really an expression of respect. When you ask thoughtful questions and listen carefully to the answers, you're communicating that this person's thoughts, experiences, and perspectives matter to you. In a world where most people are so focused on expressing themselves that they rarely seek to understand others, this kind of genuine curiosity is extraordinarily rare and valuable. The power of questioning transformed not just my social relationships, but my understanding of learning and growth. I realized that the smartest people aren't those who have all the answers. They're those who ask the best questions. The most profound lesson I ever learned about human dignity came from a man everyone else ignored. His name was Henry, and he was the night janitor at the building where I taught my evening classes. While students and teachers hurried past him as if he were invisible, I discovered that Henry possessed more wisdom about human nature than most of the executives who attended my courses. It started with a simple "Good evening, Henry," and a genuine question about how his day had been. Most people who bothered to acknowledge him at all would offer a quick nod or a distracted hello, but I was curious about his perspective on the constant stream of people who passed through his building each day. What I discovered amazed me. Henry had been watching human behavior for over 20 years, and his insights were extraordinary. He could predict which business partnerships would succeed based on how partners treated each other in the hallways. He knew which students were struggling academically just from observing their body language. He understood office politics better than most managers because he saw how people behaved when they thought no one important was watching. More than that, Henry had a philosopher's understanding of what made people tick. He told me, "Mr. Carnegie, I've learned that everyone who walks through these doors wants the same thing. They want to feel like they matter. The big executives and the struggling students, they're all looking for someone to treat them like they're important." This conversation changed my entire approach to human relations. I realized that Henry was invisible to most people, not because of his job, but because they had decided he wasn't important enough to notice. Yet he possessed insights that could have benefited every person who dismissed him. I began studying what makes people feel important versus what makes them feel insignificant. I discovered that importance isn't about job titles, wealth, or social status, about being seen, valued, and respected as a human being. The CEO who feels unimportant despite his corner office needs the same basic recognition as the janitor who feels invisible despite his essential work. I started conducting an experiment with myself. I made a commitment to treat every person I encountered as if they were the most important person in the room, not because of what they could do for me, but because every human being deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. The transformation in my relationships was immediate and profound. When I treated the restaurant server as someone whose opinion mattered, they would share insights about the menu that enhanced my dining experience. When I asked the taxi driver about his perspective on the city, I often received fascinating information that no guidebook could provide. When I spoke to the receptionist as if she were the CEO's trusted advisor, which, in many ways, she became an invaluable ally in navigating the organization. But the most powerful discovery was how this principle affected people's self-perception. When you consistently treat someone as important, they begin to see themselves that way too. They stand taller, speak with more confidence, and often rise to meet the higher expectations you've communicated through your respect. I learned that making others feel important requires 3 essential elements. First, you must genuinely see their value, not just their usefulness to you, but their inherent worth as a human being. Second, you must express that recognition through your words, attention, and behavior. Third, you must be consistent, treating them with the same respect whether others are watching or not. The practical applications are endless. When introducing people, I learned to include something that highlights their importance. I'd like you to meet Janet, who has revolutionized how this company handles customer service. When asking for help, I would frame it in terms of their expertise. You understand this system better than anyone. What do you think would be the best approach? Most importantly, I discovered that making others feel important isn't about false flattery or manipulation. It's about recognizing the truth that every person has unique value, experiences, and perspectives that deserve respect. When you approach people with this fundamental belief, they sense your sincerity and respond with openness, loyalty, and genuine affection. Henry taught me that importance isn't something you have. It's something you give and receive through human connection. When you make others feel important, you don't diminish yourself. You create a world where everyone, including you, can experience the dignity that every human being deserves. I used to be one of those people who had to win every argument, prove every point, and have the last word in every disagreement. My college debate trophy sat proudly on my desk as a symbol of my intellectual superiority. Then came the day I threw that trophy in the trash, having learned that winning arguments was actually one of the fastest ways to lose relationships and influence. The lesson came during a heated discussion with a potential business partner about the direction of a project we were considering together. He proposed an approach that I knew was flawed, and I proceeded to demolish his ideas with logic, facts, and superior reasoning. I was brilliant, thorough, and completely right. I won the argument decisively. I also lost the partnership. The next day, he called to say he had decided to work with someone else. When I asked why, he said something that haunted me. "Dale, you may have been right about the technical details, but you made me feel stupid and small. I can't work with someone who treats me like that." That conversation forced me to confront an uncomfortable truth. I had been using my intellect as a weapon rather than a tool for connection. I was so focused on being right that I had forgotten the human being on the other side of the discussion. My need to prove my superiority had cost me a valuable relationship and a promising opportunity. I began studying people who were masterful at handling disagreement and conflict. I discovered that the most influential people weren't those who won arguments. They were those who could disagree without destroying relationships, who could address conflicts while preserving dignity, and who could influence others through understanding rather than domination. The first principle I learned was that you can't win an argument, even when you prove your point logically. If you make the other person feel defeated, humiliated, or wrong, you've actually lost something far more valuable than whatever you were arguing about. People may concede your facts, but they'll resent your approach and resist your influence in the future. I developed what I call the diplomatic disagreement approach. Instead of attacking someone's ideas directly, I learned to say things like, "That's an interesting perspective. I've been looking at it from a different angle. Let me share what I've been thinking and see what you think." This approach acknowledged their viewpoint while introducing mine without creating a confrontational dynamic. But the most powerful technique I discovered was what I called agreeing my way to disagreement. I would start by finding aspects of their position that I could genuinely support, then build from that foundation toward my own perspective. You're absolutely right that customer satisfaction should be our top priority. I completely agree with that. I've been wondering if there might be another way to achieve that same goal that could also address the budget concerns you mentioned earlier. I also learned the transformative power of admitting when I was wrong. Early in my speaking career, I would defend every mistake, explain away every error, and deflect every criticism. But I discovered that acknowledging mistakes honestly and quickly actually increased rather than decreased people's respect for me. When you admit you're wrong, you disarm criticism and demonstrate the kind of intellectual honesty that people admire. Perhaps the most important lesson was learning to separate the person from the position. When someone disagreed with my ideas, I had been taking it as a personal attack on my intelligence and competence. But I learned to see disagreement as an opportunity to understand different perspectives and find better solutions. Instead of thinking he's attacking me, I could think he sees something I don't see. What can I learn from his perspective? This shift in mindset transformed not just my ability to handle conflict, but my relationships with everyone around me. People began seeking out my opinion precisely because they knew I would listen to their concerns, respect their perspectives, and work toward solutions that honored everyone's needs. The ultimate irony is that when I stopped trying to win arguments, I became far more persuasive. When I stopped demanding that others admit I was right, they became much more willing to consider my ideas. When I started treating disagreement as collaboration rather than competition, I discovered that the best solutions often emerged from the creative tension between different viewpoints. I learned that the goal of any disagreement should never be to prove who's smarter or more informed. The goal should be to find the truth, solve the problem, or reach a decision that everyone can support. When you approach conflict with that mindset, you transform potential enemies into allies and turn destructive arguments into constructive collaborations. I want to share with you the story of Margaret, a student whose complete transformation taught me how these 9 social skills work together to create something far more powerful than the sum of their parts. When Margaret first came to my class, she was intelligent, hard-working, and completely frustrated by her inability to advance in her career or build meaningful relationships. Margaret was a brilliant accountant who could solve complex financial problems that baffled her colleagues, yet she felt invisible and undervalued at work. She had tried improving her technical skills, taking additional courses, and working longer hours, but nothing seemed to help. People respected her competence, but didn't really connect with her as a person. Over the course of 6 months, I watched Margaret systematically implement each of the 9 social skills we had discussed. But what fascinated me was how each skill amplified and enhanced the others, creating a transformation that was truly remarkable to witness. She started with developing genuine interest in others, which immediately made her conversations more engaging. But when she combined that interest with remembering names and personal details, people began feeling truly valued by her attention. When she added masterful listening skills, colleagues started seeking her out not just for her financial expertise, but for her understanding and insight. As Margaret learned to speak others' language, she could translate complex financial concepts into terms that made sense to none. Combined with her growing ability to find common ground, she began building bridges between departments that had previously struggled to communicate effectively. The breakthrough came when Margaret integrated all 9 skills during a particularly challenging company meeting. The marketing and production departments were locked in a bitter dispute over budget allocations, with both sides making emotional arguments and personal attacks. Margaret began by using genuine interest to understand each department's real concerns, not just their stated positions. She asked thoughtful questions that helped people express their underlying fears and motivations. She listened masterfully, reflecting back what she heard to ensure everyone felt understood. When tensions escalated, she found common ground by pointing out that both departments shared the same ultimate goal: creating products that customers would love while maintaining profitability. She spoke to each group in their own language, discussing brand impact with marketing and operational efficiency with production. Throughout the meeting, Margaret made everyone feel important by acknowledging their expertise and contributions. When disagreements arose, she handled them diplomatically, focusing on finding solutions rather than assigning blame. Most importantly, she expressed sincere appreciation for the passion and dedication that both sides brought to their work. Result was extraordinary. Not only did the meeting end with a collaborative solution that satisfied both departments, But Margaret emerged as an informal leader whom everyone respected and trusted. Within 3 months, she was promoted to a management position that had never existed before. The company created it specifically for her because they recognized her unique ability to bring people together and solve complex interpersonal challenges. What Margaret's story taught me is that these 9 skills are not separate techniques to be used individually. They are interconnected elements of a comprehensive approach to human relations. When you develop genuine interest in others, you naturally want to remember their names and listen carefully to what they say. When you understand how to speak others' language, you can express appreciation in ways that truly resonate with them. The integration happens gradually and naturally. As you practice each skill, you begin to see how it connects with and enhances the others. Asking thoughtful questions leads to discovering common ground. Making others feel important creates an atmosphere where conflicts can be resolved diplomatically. Speaking others' language allows you to express genuine interest in terms they can fully appreciate. But perhaps most importantly, I learned that these skills work together to create something that transcends mere technique. They create authentic relationships built on mutual respect, understanding, and genuine care for others. When people sense that your social skills come from a place of sincere interest in their well-being, rather than manipulation for your own benefit, they respond with openness, loyalty, and affection that enriches every aspect of your life. The magic happens when these skills become so natural that you're no longer thinking about them as individual techniques. Instead, they become part of who you are, someone who genuinely values others and has developed the ability to express that value in ways that create meaningful connections and positive influence. I still remember the physical sensations of my first speaking engagement: sweating palms, racing heart, trembling knees, and a voice that quavered despite my best efforts to control it. Standing before that small group of farmers in Missouri, I was convinced that everyone could see my terror and judge me as inadequate. What I didn't know then was that this crushing social anxiety would become my greatest teacher and the foundation for everything I would later teach about human connection. My fear wasn't limited to public speaking. I was anxious in almost every social situation. Meeting new people filled me with dread. I would rehearse conversations in my mind, trying to predict every possible response, yet still find myself tongue-tied when the actual interaction began. I was convinced that everyone else possessed some natural social confidence that I had been denied. Through years of study and personal experience, I discovered that social anxiety isn't a character flaw or permanent limitation. It's a natural response that can be understood, managed, and ultimately transformed into social confidence. But the key insight that changed everything for me was realizing that social anxiety and social skills are intimately connected. As you develop genuine social skills, anxiety naturally diminishes. The root of most social anxiety is self-focus. When I was terrified of speaking or meeting new people, my attention was completely absorbed by my own performance, my own image, and my own potential for embarrassment. I was so worried about what others might think of me that I couldn't focus on them at all. But as I began developing genuine interest in others, something magical happened. When my attention shifted from what do they think of me to what can I learn about them, my anxiety began to evaporate. It's almost impossible to be simultaneously worried about your own performance and genuinely curious about someone else's experiences. I discovered that the 9 social skills I had been teaching were actually powerful anxiety reduction techniques. When you focus on remembering someone's name, you're not thinking about your own nervousness. When you're listening masterfully to understand their perspective, you're not worried about what you'll say next. When you're looking for ways to make them feel important, your self-consciousness fades into the background. The transformation began with small victories. I started practicing these skills in low-stakes situations with store clerks, taxi drivers, and other brief encounters where the pressure was minimal. Each positive interaction built my confidence and proved that I could connect with people successfully. I learned to reframe social situations entirely. Instead of seeing them as tests of my worth or performances to be evaluated, I began viewing them as opportunities to learn about fascinating people. Instead of walking into a room thinking, "I hope they like me," I started thinking, "I wonder what interesting stories these people have to share." One of the most powerful techniques I developed was what I call preparation through service. Before any social event, I would set an intention to help at least one person feel more comfortable, appreciated, or understood. This gave me a clear purpose that had nothing to do with my own image and everything to do with contributing positively to others' experiences. I also discovered the vulnerability, which I had always seen as weakness, was actually a strength. When I stopped trying to appear perfect and started being authentically myself, including admitting when I was nervous or uncertain, people responded with warmth and understanding rather than judgment. The physical symptoms of anxiety responded to this mental shift. When my focus moved from protecting my ego to serving others, my body relaxed. When I became genuinely curious about people instead of worried about their opinions of me, my heart rate slowed and my breathing deepened. Perhaps most importantly, I learned that social confidence isn't about never feeling nervous. It's about being able to function effectively and connect authentically with others despite occasional nerves. Even after years of experience, I still sometimes feel butterflies before important social interactions. But now those feelings are companions rather than masters, reminders that this interaction matters to me rather than evidence that I'm inadequate. The ultimate irony is that the very thing I had been most afraid of, being truly seen by others, became the source of my greatest joy and success. When you stop hiding behind a perfect facade and start showing up as your authentic self, you discover that people don't judge you as harshly as you judge yourself. Instead, they appreciate your honesty and respond with their own authenticity. The letter that changed my understanding of professional success came from John D. Rockefeller Jr., one of the most powerful businessmen in America. In it, he wrote something that astounded me. "I will pay more for the ability to deal with people than any other ability under the sun." This from a man who had access to the finest technical minds, the most brilliant strategists, and the most experienced executives in the world. That letter confirmed what I had been observing throughout my career. Technical competence might get you hired, but social mastery determines how far you'll advance and how much influence you'll have. The most successful professionals I knew weren't necessarily the smartest or most technically skilled. They were the ones who could build relationships, inspire teams, and influence others through connection rather than authority. I began studying the career trajectories of my students and noticed a consistent pattern. Those who applied these social skills in professional settings consistently outperformed their peers who relied solely on technical expertise. They received promotions faster, built stronger networks, and created opportunities that seemed to appear out of nowhere. Consider the story of Robert, an engineer at a major manufacturing company. Despite his brilliant technical innovations, he was passed over for promotion repeatedly because his colleagues found him difficult to work with. He would dismiss others' ideas quickly, interrupt people in meetings, and never acknowledge the contributions of his team members. When Robert began applying these social skills, his career transformed. He started meetings by genuinely asking about his colleagues' perspectives on projects. He learned to speak their language, translating complex technical concepts into business benefits that executives could understand. He began appreciating the unique contributions of each team member publicly and specifically. Within 18 months, Robert was promoted to lead the engineering department. But more importantly, he had built a team that was genuinely excited to work with him. His technical innovations were finally being implemented because he had learned to influence through relationship rather than demanding compliance through expertise alone. The applications extend far beyond individual career advancement. I watched companies transform their entire cultures by teaching these principles to their leadership teams. When managers learned to show genuine interest in their employees' professional development, productivity increased dramatically. When executives learned to listen masterfully to customer concerns, product development became more focused and successful in sales. I observed that the most successful professionals weren't those with the most aggressive closing techniques, but those who had mastered the art of understanding their customers' real needs and communicating solutions in language that resonated with their values and priorities. They built relationships that resulted in referrals, repeat business, and loyal customers who became advocates for their services. Leadership became redefined in my mind. The most effective leaders weren't those who commanded through position or intimidated through force of personality. They were those who could inspire others to follow them willingly because people felt valued, understood, and appreciated under their guidance. I discovered that these skills were particularly powerful in negotiations and conflict resolution. When both parties felt heard, respected, and understood, they were far more willing to work toward mutually beneficial solutions. The ability to find common ground and handle disagreement diplomatically turned potential adversaries into collaborative partners. Perhaps most significantly, I learned that professional relationships built on these principles created what I call compound career benefits. When you consistently make others feel important and appreciated, they remember you positively. They recommend you for opportunities, include you in important projects, and become genuine advocates for your success. The network effects are extraordinary. People who feel valued by you want to help you succeed. They share information, make introductions, and create opportunities that would be impossible to generate through traditional networking approaches. Your reputation spreads organically because people enjoy talking about positive experiences they've had with you. These skills also provide a significant advantage in organizational politics, not by manipulating others, but by building genuine relationships that transcend departmental boundaries and hierarchical levels. When people trust and respect you, they're more likely to support your initiatives, share important information, and collaborate effectively on complex projects. The ultimate professional advantage is that these skills make work more enjoyable and fulfilling. When you're surrounded by people who appreciate working with you, when your ideas are heard and implemented, and when you're able to contribute to others' success while advancing your own career, work becomes energizing rather than draining. The most beautiful application of these social skills happened right in my own home, and it taught me that the principles that work in business and public speaking are even more powerful in our most intimate relationships. My marriage was transformed when I finally understood that the person closest to me deserved the same genuine interest, appreciation, and respect that I was teaching others to give to strangers. Early in my marriage, I made the mistake that destroys so many relationships. I took my wife for granted. I was courteous to business associates, charming with students, and patient with strangers. But I saved my worst behavior for the person who mattered most to me. I would come home exhausted from giving my best energy to everyone else, leaving nothing but irritability and distraction for the woman who shared my life. The wake-up call came during a conversation with one of my students, a man whose marriage had just ended in divorce. He said something that haunted me. "Dale, I was kinder to my secretary than I was to my wife. I remembered my clients' birthdays but forgot my own anniversary. I listened carefully to strangers' problems but dismissed my wife's concerns as nagging. No wonder she felt unloved and unimportant." That night, I went home and really looked at my own behavior. I realized I had been guilty of the same neglect. I was teaching others to show genuine interest in people, while barely paying attention to my wife's daily experiences. I was helping strangers feel important while making the most important person in my life feel invisible. I began applying every principle I taught to my marriage, starting with genuine interest. Instead of coming home and immediately sharing my day, I learned to ask about hers first. Instead of half listening while reading the newspaper, I gave her my complete attention. Instead of assuming I knew what she was thinking or feeling, I asked thoughtful questions that helped me understand her perspective. The transformation was remarkable. When I started listening to my wife with the same intensity I brought to my professional relationships, I discovered depths to her personality that I had never noticed. She had insights about people and situations that amazed me. She had dreams and concerns that I had been too distracted to explore. She had a wisdom about human nature that complemented my own understanding perfectly. I learned to appreciate her contributions specifically and sincerely, not with generic compliments, but with detailed recognition of how her efforts enhanced our life together. Instead of taking for granted the 1,000 small things she did daily, I began acknowledging them. The way she created a peaceful home environment, her skill at managing our social calendar, her intuitive understanding of people's needs. Most importantly, I learned to handle our disagreements with the same diplomatic skill I used in business conflicts. Instead of trying to win arguments, I focused on understanding her perspective and finding solutions that honored both our needs. Instead of being defensive when she criticized my behavior, I learned to listen for the truth in her concerns and appreciate her willingness to help me grow. The ripple effects extended far beyond our marriage. When children came into our lives, I discovered that these same principles created the foundation for deep, lasting relationships with them. By showing genuine interest in their experiences, really listening to their concerns, and making them feel important as individuals, I built connections that survived the turbulent teenage years and grew stronger over time. I began observing other families and noticed that the happiest ones were those where these principles were practiced naturally. Parents who listened to their children with genuine interest raised kids who felt comfortable sharing their real thoughts and feelings. Families who appreciated each other's contributions created homes filled with warmth and mutual support. In friendships, too, these skills created bonds that lasted decades. Friends who felt genuinely valued and understood became loyal companions through life's ups and downs. By investing in others' happiness and success, I discovered that my own life became richer and more meaningful. Perhaps the most profound lesson was learning that love isn't just a feeling, it's a skill that can be developed and strengthened through practice. The more you learn to show genuine interest, express sincere appreciation, and handle conflicts constructively, the deeper and more satisfying your relationships become. The ultimate irony is that these skills, which I had originally developed to help me succeed professionally, brought me the greatest rewards in my personal life. Success in business was satisfying, but the deep connections I built with family and friends provided the meaning and joy that made all other achievements worthwhile. After teaching these principles to thousands of people, I discovered that knowledge without application is worthless. You can understand every concept I've shared, agree with every principle, and still see no change in your relationships if you don't systematically practice these skills until they become natural habits. That's why I developed this 30-day transformation planner practical roadmap that ensures you'll actually implement what you've learned. The plan is based on my observation that it takes approximately 30 days of consistent practice to transform a conscious technique into an unconscious habit. During the first week, you'll feel awkward and deliberate as you apply these skills. By the second week, they'll start feeling more natural. By the third week, you'll begin seeing significant results. And by the fourth week, these behaviors will become so automatic that you'll wonder how you ever functioned without them. Week 1. Foundation building. Your focus this week is on developing genuine interest in others and remembering names each day. Make it your goal to have at least one meaningful conversation where you focus entirely on learning about the other person. Ask questions about their background, interests, and experiences. Practice the name repetition technique with every new person you meet. And keep a small notebook to record details about people you encounter. Start with low-pressure situations conversations with store clerks, taxi drivers, or neighbors. The goal isn't to impress anyone, but to develop your curiosity muscles and practice paying attention to others. By the end of this week, you should notice that people seem more willing to talk with you and that you're genuinely enjoying these interactions. Week 2. Listening and language. Now you'll add masterful listening and speaking others' language to your foundation skills. Before every conversation, set an intention to understand the other person's perspective completely. Practice asking follow-up questions that show you're truly listening. Pay attention to whether people prefer emotional language, practical language, or analytical language, and adapt your communication style accordingly. This week, you'll also begin expressing sincere appreciation. Look for at least 3 opportunities each day to acknowledge someone's efforts, contributions, or positive qualities. Make your appreciation specific and genuine. Notice how people respond when they feel truly valued and understood. Week 3. Connection and importance. This week focuses on finding common ground and making others feel important. In every interaction, look for shared experiences, values, or interests that can create connection. Practice treating everyone you meet as if they're the most important person in the room, regardless of their job title or social status. Begin applying these skills to more challenging situations, workplace conflicts, difficult family dynamics, or stressful social events. You should start noticing that people seek out your company and that your influence in various situations is growing significantly. Week 4. Advanced integration. Your final week emphasizes handling disagreement diplomatically while integrating all 9 skills seamlessly. Practice the agreeing your way to disagreement technique in situations where you have different opinions. Focus on finding solutions that make everyone feel heard and respected. This week, challenge yourself to apply these skills in your most important relationships with family members, close friends, or key colleagues. The goal is to demonstrate that these aren't just techniques for strangers, but principles that can transform your deepest connections. Throughout all 4 weeks, keep a daily journal tracking your progress. Note which skills feel natural and which need more practice. Record specific examples of positive responses you receive from others. Write down insights about human nature that emerge from your increased attention to people around you. The key to success is consistency rather than perfection. You don't need to master every skill immediately. Instead, focus on making small improvements each day. Some conversations will go better than others, and that's perfectly normal. The goal is steady progress, not flawless performance. By the end of these 30 days, you'll have fundamentally changed how you relate to others and how they relate to you. More importantly, you'll have developed habits that will continue serving you for the rest of your life, creating richer relationships and greater influence than you ever thought possible. As I reflect on a lifetime dedicated to understanding human relations, I'm struck by a profound truth. The connections you build with others become your most lasting legacy. Long after your professional achievements are forgotten, long after your material possessions have passed to others, the impact you've had on human hearts and lives continues to ripple through generations. I think of all the students who have passed through my courses, And I realized that what matters most isn't whether they remember the specific techniques I taught, but whether they've learned to see others as valuable human beings worthy of respect, understanding, and appreciation. The principles I've shared with you aren't just tools for personal success. They're fundamental to creating a more connected, compassionate world. Every time you show genuine interest in another person, you remind them that they matter. Every time you listen with your full attention, you give someone the gift of feeling truly heard. Every time you make someone feel important, you plant seeds of confidence that may bloom in ways you'll never know about. Every time you handle conflict with grace and respect, you model a better way of resolving differences. These may seem like small acts, but I've learned that small acts of human kindness create the foundation for everything meaningful in life. The executive who feels valued by your attention may pass that feeling on to her employees. The child who feels genuinely heard by you may grow up to be a more empathetic parent. The colleague whose ideas you appreciate may develop the confidence to pursue innovations that benefit thousands of people. I want you to understand that developing these social skills isn't just about improving your own life, though it will certainly do that. It's about becoming the kind of person who makes the world a little brighter for everyone you encounter. In a time when technology often isolates us, when political differences divide us, and when many people feel lonely despite being more connected than ever, your ability to create genuine human connection becomes a gift to humanity. The ripple effects of your transformation will extend far beyond what you can see or measure. Years from now, someone may make a crucial decision based on confidence you helped them develop. A relationship may be saved because you modeled how to listen with understanding. A career may flourish because you showed someone that their contributions were valuable. This is the legacy I hope you'll choose to create, not just success for yourself, but positive impact on every life you touch. When you develop these social skills from a place of genuine care for others, you become part of a chain of human kindness that stretches across generations. My final encouragement to you is this: start today. Don't wait until you feel ready or until circumstances are perfect. Begin with the very next person you encounter. Show them the genuine interest, respect, and appreciation that every human being deserves. Listen to them as if their words matter, because they do. Help them feel important because they are. The world needs more people who understand that behind every face is a human being with hopes, fears, dreams, and the deep desire to be valued and understood. Be one of those people. Your life will be richer, your relationships deeper, and your influence more positive than you ever imagined possible. This is my gift to you and my challenge. Use these skills not just to get what you want from others, but to give what they need from you. In doing so, you'll discover that the greatest success in life comes not from what you achieve, but from the connections you create and the lives you touch along the way.